on a commonplace perception that persons with sickle cell should not have a purpose because they are born to die, right? So this is the rhetoric we hear from a lot of parents. So a lot of parents will tell you, we're not going to pay the fees for our child, we're not going to send our child to school, or we're not even going to pay medical bills, practically because this child is a liability that is practically born to die. Now, when you speak with warriors, a lot of them actually reverberate these thoughts, right? And they give up long before the war is over, mainly due to the psychological traumas of life. Now, but today we have a group of fantastic speakers, and our speakers are warriors who have actually taken the road less traveled. And in doing so, they have shattered glass ceilings. They have gone on to achieve amazing things in their chosen career. From Bukola Bolarinwa, who is the head of HIMA, the founder of HIMA, and also a lead with Scaf, which is the Sickle Cell Aid Foundation, to 3 CEOs, and also an amazing journalist who's joined us here today. Now, one thing I would say that reverberated amongst the Scaf executives is that their achievements have to be celebrated and their stories have to be told. Like, these are stories we want to hear every day. Now, to put this in context, when you read articles on people who live with a chronic health condition and the implications of that condition on their mental health, what you usually see is that the articles will tell you that they deal with an extra layer of anxiety, panic attacks, depression. The list is actually endless, right? Now, it's one thing to read articles, it's another thing to actually talk to people who are living with chronic health conditions. And one story that, or one theme that runs across the line is that they will tell you that a lot of them are angry. They feel like the odds are stacked against them. They feel like every other person is given a free pass to achieve whatever they want to achieve in life. But for them, they have to fight an extra battle. And it's almost like your body starts to fight against you. And that is then problematic, right? So it's almost like the odds are really stacked against you. And as a result of that, there's a lot of anger, bitterness, and arguably we can say it is justified, right? But we have a group of people here today who've been dealt with the same cards, who've had to face an uphill battle, but they have chosen to rise above it and they have chosen to dominate their chosen field, right? So in doing so, they've achieved a lot of great things, and they have actually challenged the commonplace perception I talked about earlier, that people with sickle cell should have no purpose. So in preparing for this webinar, I went to read all the amazing profiles. I met Mayoma on Clubhouse and I went on his Instagram and I was like, oh my God, this is like fantastic work he's doing in journalism. And I came across Beatrice's work. I found out like she's doing her MBA, which I found out yesterday actually. And I was just marveled. And I think I sent her an email to say like, in a snapshot, you are goals, right? So I've known Buki, I've known Mr. Bakare, so it's just amazing to have you all here today. So I'll do the honors of introducing you all. I would start by introducing, so I'm not going to introduce everyone before we start. So I'll start with the first speaker, introduce Buki, then I'll go on to introduce every other person. But with each person I introduce, the person will then go on to talk for about 5 minutes about their career trajectory, after which we'll then have a question and answer session. So if you have any questions that pop on your head during the session, please feel free to ask in the question and answer session. We're going to be keeping tabs, so we're going to be following on them. So our first speaker is Bukola Bolarinwa, who is popularly known as Buki B or Niger Daydreamer. And she's popular on Twitter, might I add. She's a renowned sickle cell advocate. She's currently the head of outreach and partnership at the Sickle Cell Aid Foundation. Now, when Buki has been with Scaf for donkey years, over 8 years now. And when she joined Scaf, she noticed that there was a gap, right? A gap in ensuring that people with sickle cell had access to blood, right? Because you then suffer with from anemia and then you need blood donations. And so she started HIMA Health Initiative. But HIMA Health Initiative thinks beyond sickle cell. It also covers a range of other illnesses that would need blood donation, and even accident victims, and the list is endless, right? Now, and HIMA Health Initiative actually is one of the lead organizations that is plugging the blood supply gap in Nigeria. Now, as a result of Buki's work with Scaf and also Haima, she's received a lot of awards, both internationally and nationally as well. She is one of the Queen's Young Leaders, an award that was presented to her by Queen Elizabeth herself. She's also a Future Awards winner in Nigeria. She's also an Obama Fellow. The list is endless. I'm sure if I start, I will stop today. And she's been featured on many international and national platforms, including BBC, NTA, like the range is wide. So it's actually amazing to have her as a member of Scaf, because she doesn't just think local with Scaf, she thinks global. And she has basically transformed Scaf to where Scaf is today. And we're indebted, like we're heavily indebted to her, might I say. So Buki, over to you. So you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Nkechi. Yeah, when we were discussing this panel and I saw the people that were on there, I was like, yes, why do you want me on here? Because I don't really feel like I deserve to be like on this space. I feel like everybody here is really doing some amazing work. And I've always felt that I've had 2 career paths. So I've had all the work that I've done with Scaf and Haima and in the NGO space and advocacy space. And then I've had like a full-time career. I started as a lawyer and then as a consultant. And then now that's what I do. I do political risk consulting. And then I do like part-time writing on the side as well. I guess for me, the thing has always been support. I feel like part of the reason I'm able to do so much, both in Scaf and Haima and with my job as well, is that I've always had support from my family. When you were doing the intro, in case you're talking about people feeling really angry and feeling cheated, and I've met someone who was like that, actually, a sickle cell warrior in Lagos, when we were doing one of our genetic counseling talks, and he was really, really angry. He was angry at his parents. He was angry at kind of life, or like he felt cheated basically, because he felt like whatever he wanted to achieve, because of he had a lot of complications, including like leg ulcers and so on. He felt that he was drawn back from that. And he was also really angry at his parents because they didn't have a good relationship, and although some of those things that you said about feeling like a burden, they had kind of made him feel like that. And I think that the reason that I've been able to kind of, well, achieve some things in my life is from my parents. Starting from when I was young, I was never made to feel like a burden. I was never made to feel like I couldn't achieve. They would always tell me to know my limits. I think that was always the word that my parents always used to use. Know your limits. Know that you're not like everybody else. If people are jumping on trees, you can't jump on trees. If you do jump on trees, you pay for it later with the crisis and so on. And so that they did always tell me that, you know, you need to know your limits, but they never told me that I was limited, or that there was anything that I couldn't do, or there was anything that I couldn't achieve. There was a time I wanted to play lawn tennis, actually. There was a lawn tennis club in Kaduna when we were growing up. And they were like, no, you can't play tennis because you have crisis. And I was like, oh, but I want to try it. And they were like, okay. And then I tried it, and then I had crisis. And then, so it was always that kind of like test it out. Like they didn't want to kind of immediately tell me that there's a limit onto something you can do. If you can try it out. If you see that it doesn't work, then you know that. But to immediately feel like you have inhibitions from a young age, I think that's really where some of the challenges are. And so for me, I think that the main thing is really with growing up with who you're surrounded by, your family, your friends. If they make you feel like you're limited, or there are certain things that you can achieve, then over time that starts to kind of build up. So I would say that everything I've been lucky enough to get has been because of my parents, my family, and my friends, and the kind of support I've had. I hope that's a good introduction.
Thank you, Buki. That's actually a good one, because it shows the roles that parents can play in ensuring that we get the best of our lives. So our next speaker is Mr. Bakare. Mr. Bakare is a business executive in the energy industry, specifically focused on infrastructure and the infrastructure and power sectors. He has over 20 years of experience in diverse expertise in business management, and is also responsible for the growth and governance of Fenchurch Group of companies. He actually piloted the development of Fenchurch from a small logistics company or a single logistics company to a company with strong presence in the energy and power sector in Nigeria. Prior to joining Fenchurch, he had worked with an industry company where he was a senior associate in the UK. He was also a business development lead at Xenon Oil and Gas Nigeria, and served as an advisor to Transcorp PLC Nigeria. Currently sits on boards of companies across West Africa, and he's also an advisor to Scaf. As you can imagine from his wealth of expertise, you would understand that he has a strong educational background. He obtained a first degree in law from the University of London, and he's undertaken various courses at the Energy Institute UK, Institute of Management and Leadership UK as well. So we're excited to have you here with us. Mr. Bakari, over to you.
Thank you very much. Just like Buki had said, also growing up with sickle cell, it was a matter of knowing your limits physically, not mentally. My mom also, like Buki had pointed out, my mom used to be like, she'd say, you're not like all the other, if anything happens, you get a crisis, and that's on you. So always understand that. But in terms of what I could do and not do, that wasn't an issue. However, more importantly, and the way life is, when I sent the link and the flyer of this conference to some of my friends, I got a lot of calls. Should you really be doing this? You're always raising money for one project or the other. Are you sure your investors want to hear about you, sickle cell, and all that? And I said, that's the exact reason why I must do it. This is the reason why one must start to change the narrative. Like Nkechi said earlier on, people out there have these different conceptions about sickle cell. They think, oh, sickle cell, first, the one you hear all the time is sickle cell, you go and die at 21. So when you have a crisis, and someone crisis, like I thought, you don't get crisis anymore after 21. So it's people expect you to die, by the time you're 21. And then if you don't die, then they think, well, okay, so that's it, then it's done. But that's not the case, right? So I spent a lot of time, and that was part of the reason why I got involved with Scaf. So we need to change that narrative. We need to let people know that you can function and achieve great things, right? You just need to know your limits. You need to know how to manage yourself, because at the end of the day, when it comes to business, you're the greatest asset to your company. The same way all your employees are the greatest asset. So you have to take care of yourself. So if there's a meeting that you can't take, then you can't take it. For example, I'm meant to be in Guinea now, and then tomorrow I'm meant to be leaving for Sierra Leone. But I've got sickle cell retinopathy, so I had eye surgery as a result of what's it called. And the doctor said last week, you really shouldn't be getting on a plane now because you've got silicone oil in one eye, and the pressure cabin and what's it called. And I said, this is a very important meeting. And he was like, which one is more important, your health or business? So I said, okay, so there's a team in Guinea now as I speak, and they're leaving for Sierra Leone also, but I'm here monitoring everything from here. It's just knowing your limits physically, mentally. The tendency to be upset and angry when you have crisis is there. And no one knows that pain unless someone has gone through that pain before themselves. And I say it's pain like no other. But at the end of the day, you have to just be strong. And in a roundabout way, having sickle cell, I would say, formed my character. It made me strong, and it made me, because I didn't go out a lot to play, so I would read. So that's how I'm a life reader. I always read. So I constantly know how to keep myself company. It's just one of those things. But yes, sickle cell doesn't mean you die at 21, and it doesn't mean there is no life with sickle cell. And that's part of the reason why I'm happy to be here to help change that narrative. I hope that's helped.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bakari. I totally like the perspective you took about changing the narrative, even within the business space, because a lot of people would shy away from that, but you've embraced it wholeheartedly, which is totally amazing. And it raises the necessary awareness we need even within that space. So thank you. So our next speaker is Jenica Leah, and she's an industry specialist speaker for sickle cell disease. She's also an award-winning author. We've practically had to get some of her books and give them out in Nigeria as part of our outreach projects. So she's written a couple of books on sickle cell disorder. She's also the founder of a publishing company, which I found quite interesting, because what she does with her publishing company is practically to ensure that young writers, who are usually first-time writers, have access to the market to actually get their voice out there, and which is something that we don't see quite often, because people actually struggle to get their materials out there. Now, through her publishing outfit, she's achieved so much. Now, I'd also add that Jenica has achieved this even whilst going through complications of sickle cell. She's had to have a hip replacement. She's also had a stroke, which survived. And so she's gone through so many complications, and yet she's still putting herself out there for the people. And it's an honor to hear her speak today. So Jenica, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here on this platform. It's actually an honor to be here, and I'm very kind of interested and also encouraged to share my journey that I've had into kind of my business life, mainly because I have not taken the path that is usually the norm for, you know, a lot of us. You go to school, then on to university, you get your degree, and then you go into a career. I've actually managed to kind of navigate through to where I am today. And I actually did not go to university, which I know a lot of people either frown upon or are very surprised about that fact. But it's something, I think initially when I started to kind of speak more and become more open and in the work that I do, it was something that I sometimes shied away from sharing, just because of the stigma, I think, that goes towards people who haven't really been to university, and how educated does that mean that you actually are. But for myself, I had to make a decision when I was at college age, so about 15, 16, I struggled a lot. That was a time where my sickle cell flared up quite a bit. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I have had a stroke, which I had in my early teenage years. After that, it kind of just progressed to one complication after another. And I know everyone has spoken about, you know, knowing your limits, kind of feeling almost like you don't want to do too much because, you know, you might not last, your life may end so early. I didn't feel that I wasn't going to make it or wasn't going to progress. At the time when I should have went to university, I had to choose between my health or studying. And the stress and pressures that I went through just in college alone was what led to me making the decision that I believe I'm going to have to either take a break and go to university at a later time in life, which was actually my plan, or go to university and just try and push through. I didn't want to put myself under that pressure, and thankfully my family and those who support me also you know, encouraged me to do what I felt was right for myself. So I focused a lot on my health, and from a very kind of young age, I'm talking maybe about 17, 18, I kind of went straight into work. And when I say work, I would more or less say that I kind of went into a field of entrepreneurship. So I started as kind of like a full-time model in the UK, which then led to me, you know, doing a lot of traveling. However, it meant that I could choose my you know, flexibility. If I was able to make it, I could go. If I wasn't able to make a casting, I just wouldn't go. I then went from modeling to setting up and organizing fashion show events all around the world, which again included me traveling. One of the reasons why I was happy about that transition was because, as was mentioned, I have a vascular necrosis. So at about 19, my hips started to cause me a lot of problems. I don't know if runway walking was in my future, to be honest with you. So I kind of went from on the runway to off the runway, organizing fashion shows, traveling around the world. And at that point, I kind of, because I was always told, you know, you might not be able to travel often, you might not be able to do many things, I felt like the journey that I was on was proving to myself all of the things that I actually can do if I just take time to manage my health and have a good balance. And that was what led me to writing my children's book, which is now a series of books, My Friend Jen. The protagonist character is myself in the first book. It's based on my journey, and it was inspired because it was at a time when I felt like there's nothing that I can't do. I just have to do things a little bit different. And that's something that I would like to, you know, encourage and definitely motivate those that are listening today. Sometimes you may not take the path that everybody else takes, but you can take a path that is good for yourself. That book led me to meet a few members of Scaf Nigeria, actually, through our book donation project, where we donated 200 of our books to the Sickle Cell Aid Foundation of Nigeria. And I've also done the same projects in Gambia and in Jamaica. And off the back of my book, I launched my publishing company because I really wanted to go down the traditional publishing route so that sickle cell could be more spoken about, put more on the map, and create more awareness of that. However, I had a number of companies, you know, close the door in my face or say there wasn't a need for such a book, which was more motivation for me to get my book out there and also to encourage others to share their stories. So through my publishing house, I don't just share children's books or stories about sickle cell, although I have worked and I'm working with other authors to promote their stories as well about sickle cell. But it's almost as if the journey that I've taken has led me to this point, and now I'm able to kind of run my own business and navigate my life at a balance in a way that works for me. It's not easy, but it's possible, and that's kind of the message that I want to leave and share today. So I'm looking forward to being a part of this.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was really helpful. And I like that you said it's not easy, but like definitely we can push through it. And it's so inspirational to hear how you had to make a choice between your health and also education, because that's not a choice that a lot of people have to face in their teenage age at all. So it is interesting to hear how you navigated that quite smoothly. So thank you. So our next speaker is one of my fave. So pardon me, I'm going to have moderator's privileges to have a fave. For so many reasons. One, because she's a woman who's dominated her space, and she's dominated in an industry that you would usually think is male dominated as well. So she's dominated in the tech marketing space, and she's not just done that in Nigeria, but also across the EMEA and also Asian Pacific. By EMEA, that's Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Now, she's headed marketing departments in blue chip multinational organizations, many of which you are all familiar with, such as Microsoft UK, Nokia, Airtel, World Trade Center, and Publicis. She's also experienced in managing boards and stakeholder relationships and has worked with industries such as mobile technology, telecommunications, aviation, oil and gas, real estate, services and advertising. Like, the list is actually endless. And she also has a broad range of client portfolio. Her clients include Pepsi, Visa, Heineken, Nestle. Again, the list is endless. Now, she recently founded, not recently, in about 2015, she founded Patrick Mason, a luxury lifestyle brand, which produces one of the most fantastic scented candles you would find. Now, an interesting fact about Beatrice is the fact that she's traveled quite widely. She's traveled to over 21 countries. I say that's interesting because a lot of people with sickle cell would rather not travel. Because when you're thinking of traveling, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to go on air, I'm going to like fly, and then that might cause a crisis when I arrive. When I arrive, I'm going to a country which most likely they do not speak the language, or they do not know much about sickle cell. So how am I going to navigate that? And also, if you're going to a country that is unusually hot, unusually cold, you're then thinking, okay, would I get a crisis a few days after arrival? So then my journey is kind of wasted. But she's not just had to do this for leisure, but also for work. And that tells a lot about her resilience. So it's an honor to actually have her here and have her talk to us about her career trajectory, because like Buki said at the beginning, we watched her video and we were totally blown away. And it's interesting to see how she's built her empire irrespective of the challenges that she's faced. So Beatrice, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I think I'm going to start my journey, I think, much earlier when I was younger. My uncle is a famous journalist, and he had written this book. I always knew I was sick, but it wasn't, I think my family wasn't that vocal about my health. And then my uncle had written this book, and then I read it. And while reading it, the young female died. And then I asked my uncle, I'm like, am I gonna die? And he's like, no, it's not you. I'm like, but it sounds like me, And so that was my first intro into what it meant to be, sickle cell. And I had this conversation with my parents. And of course, they give you all this spiel about, your health is a difficult one. Sometimes people, and then of course, I think when we were younger, you would hear of like a Ogbanje or whatever it is, so I was like, okay, is it the same thing or is it not, or whatever it is? But I think after, my 10th or 11th year, I literally wiped all of that out of my mind. I was going to boarding house. So initially I wanted to go to Queen's College, and my parents were happy because they wanted me to be in day school. But then Queen's College didn't work out and I had to go to Shagamu. My mother was looking at me like, are you for real? Like, drive all the way to Shagamu and you're going to be in boarding house all by yourself and we're not going to be able to check up on you and everything. But for me, it was kind of my way to escape. And somehow, my parents were dealing with, that conversation. And then they didn't realize, so we lived in Surulere back then, and in Surulere there are all these little football clubs, and I had been secretly part of a football club. I was actually the goalie. They didn't know. So it was the day of the tournament. It was a Saturday, and my dad had been home. He was a traveling salesman, let me just put it that way. My dad was home and he just saw me in my jersey with the ball, and my father was like, where the hell are you going? I'm like, I'm going to play football. Like, I'm the best goalie. Like, what are you talking about? And my dad refused. He was like, no, I'm not going to deal with it. So I had to watch the football from the balcony. So for me, going to boarding house was an escape. Escape from all of the different restrictions that I had. But I would say that the only reason my mom was comfortable with me was, I think back then, Professor Leshi at what's it called? Luth had just retired and moved back to Shagamu. He was, I think at that point, he had sort of like a herbal remedy, which he was sort of making available to sickle cell patients. And my mother thought, okay, this is fine. At least the doctor is in Shagamu. So before I even went into school, we had gone into his clinic. It was a very small clinic in Shagamu there. We had bought this whole jerry can of the drugs. It was the worst thing I ever tasted in my life, took it and then took me to the boarding, my house mistress, and said, hey, this is her drugs and you have to check up on her and this and that and whatever. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what's all this dramatics? I've been ill a few times, it's not that serious or whatever. But then the first crisis I had, nobody knew what to do. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't ready for it. I remember they had to call late Miss Ojolate of blessed memory, and she came and she gave me Valium. In fact, when I was taking that Valium, I took it and I said my last prayers because I'm like, I know my drugs. This is not one of them. And I know this is what my mom takes to sleep, so I may not wake up after this. I literally woke up the next morning. I'm like, okay, that worked, right? But I'd say that boarding house kind of allowed me to test some of my limits in terms of sometimes when I got tired of taking my drugs, I stopped for a while and I learned, the effects of that. Or I would try, certain sports. I remember I tried basketball and I realized, okay, this is not for me, but I kept trying. I kept looking for things. I was part of the match, match past parades and stuff like that, but I kept finding things that were I think more suited to my health. But then when I sort of left secondary school and it was time to go to university, obviously I faced challenges from a financial point of view, and I think that's a different conversation. But I think the biggest part for me was having to work and work for some of these organizations that required you to travel. And the one thing I would say is I try not to consume too much information about anything that's negative. So when I moved to the UK, I got my letter. I had to move to the UK in 2 weeks. I had not thought about what to wear. I did not even remember UK was a cold location. I got there and I had to figure it out, what to wear. This is, I'm feeling cold and this and that. But I think through my life, I have always set coping mechanisms for myself. So I have rules like, don't leave more than 20 minutes away from work, because you have to ensure that if you had to dash back home for anything, you can do that quickly. If it's a health emergency, you can actually cope with that. And then when I traveled, I think traveling for me was some of the fun experiences. I remember once going to South Africa. First time I went to Johannesburg, I got sick. And I was like, one off. Next time I went to Cape Town, I got sick. And the Cape Town one was worse. By the time I got to the hospital, the doctor was laughing at me. And I'm like, I'm sick, you're laughing. Like, I don't get this. And he's like, has anybody ever, sort of explained altitude to you? I'm like, what's that? And then he explains altitude. And then now I know that there's some countries, they say I cannot go, right? I say they say because I always want to leave room for opportunity for myself in preparing, because I believe that this journey is both, a mental one, a physical one, and a faith-based one. I come from, a family that I think has really focused on faith where my health is concerned. I remember as, a teenager reading about a saint called Padre Pio, who literally used to bleed at the same spots Jesus was crucified. That's the story and whatever. And I remember back then saying to myself, okay, if he used to bleed and I used to be sick, so dear Lord, please accept my, my illness as recompense for my sin. And I look at my sin like when I test my limits and I get sick, right? I have done penance for that. But I think at the end of the day, it's about having for yourself that is stronger than your pain. It's about ensuring you have coping mechanisms, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends. I remember even coming back from that essay experience, and we had to get on the flight. Now, apart from, I think, one other colleague, no other person knew in my, in my team that I had sickle cell. So here I was trying to get back on the plane, and I was very sick. And, the attendants looked at me and they said, I'm sorry, you can't get on board. I looked at it and I said, Lord, I'm getting on this flight because I'm not going to stay behind. We're all going together. So luckily, one of my colleagues recognized Pastor Tony Rapu. And, I thank God for him being on that flight that day. And he's a doctor. So they said, because they were arguing that there's no medical doctor on board if anything happened and whatever, and he so happened to be on board, and he made sure he kept checking up on me until I got home. But it's so important to understand that aside your sickle cell, life will happen to you irrespective, right? You have to just figure out whether you are ready to play or not. right? You have to understand that life is a game. Everybody's dealing with their own, some people it's not health, you know, some people it's other things. So you have to make a personal commitment yourself towards what it is that is bigger than your pain. And I think when you commit to that, and I remember, you know, for me, I think I literally planned my life to 40, because it's when you're, you know, 18, you will die. When you're 24, so I was like, okay, 18, I didn't die. Okay, we've gone through that. 24, I'm still alive. And then I passed my 40s, and I'm like, okay. So today I look at myself as living my bonus life, right? This is the life they said I wouldn't get to have. You know, this is the life people said to me, you know, was impossible. And even sometimes now when I gain weight, I'm like, you know, people used to comment about how skinny, you know, and I remember one of my teachers saying, you look like then, if the wind blew, you used to just vibrate with the wind. And I realized that, you know, at the end of the day, taking care of yourself is very, very important. As much as you can be angry with the fact that you have to take meds every day, you have to do what you have to do. But I would say to everybody, please take your meds, but also monitor what each medication is doing to you. The one blessing I got from my mom literally was every time my mom was with me. Literally, I think I'm so embarrassed. My mom literally still comes in my 40s to stay with me in hospital. So please don't judge me for that. But what I take away from my mom is this: every single drug that's being put into you, she would ask, what is this? What is that? Does this mix well with that? Because she you know, I think I asked her in my 30s, why do you do that? She said, when you were young once, you were too young to remember. There was, I think, a 2-year-old in the bed next to me at Luth. Unfortunately, the nurse did not read the charts and gave the wrong child an injection, and in less than 2 minutes, that child was dead. Right? So I take so much care about what works for me. I remember at some point in time when I started pushing myself at work, I was taking Nurofen. And of course, you know, you have the different milligrams for depending on, you know, when your pain was. But then I started remembering that, or rather, I started forgetting things. And I thought to myself, okay, with my other drugs, this wasn't happening. You know, so I realized Nurofen was actually affecting my mental alertness, and I had to cut it out. Right? So you have to actually pay attention as you're taking your drugs to what exactly it's doing to you, because your drugs are supposed to help you live your life better, not to hold you back. So if something is not working, talk to your doctor about it. And honestly, I have to give a shout out to Dr. Bangwe, the medical director at St. Nicholas Hospital. Dr. Bangwe said to me, he said, Beatrice, every time I see a strange number calling me, I know it's you. Because irrespective of the country I went to and I got a sickle cell, whatever, they'll say, oh, your HB. And I'm like, I don't know that. I know PDC, I know this. So first thing I used to do is, here's my doctor's number. Talk to him about what you're about to do to me before you start it. So he literally is my traveling doctor everywhere I went. If I had an issue, you had to talk to Dr. Bangwe before you treated me. And some of those things, I believe, are part of the things that have helped me cope as I went along. Because the one thing I picked up is that your medical history is very important, right? Your medical history is very important. So the person who knows it the best, please avail yourself. It is your right for that doctor to constantly make sure that you are doing well. They are not doing you a favor, right? You have to take ownership. So I'm sorry, I think I've gone past 5 minutes, but
Thank you.
that's yeah.
I really enjoyed it, to be honest. And I like the fact that you said that the journey is a mental, physical, and also spiritual one. In addition to that, I think one thing that struck me when you were talking is the fact that you said, aside your sickle cell, life would happen to you, and you practically have to find out whether you're ready to play. I think that's very important, because a lot of people can get stuck in that bubble of everything is about sickle cell, how the cards that life has dealt me, and how I've been so unfortunate to have to deal with this. But then you're saying life would happen to you, and really for you to move on, you have to kind of push through it. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, to be honest. So our final speaker for the day before we go into the question and answer session is Mayowa Tijani. Mayowa is an award-winning development journalist, and he's a fact checker as well, and also a Chevening alumnus. One interesting fact about Mayowa is that in 2018, he actually ran the first fact check of the presidential debate, the first in Nigeria actually at the time. So that was at the 58th history of Nigeria. Now, after achieving that feat, like, he kind of went global, right? He was hired by AFP to lead its fact-checking project in Nigeria. And since then, he's not just fact-checked for Nigeria, but he's also done the same for other countries across Africa, especially during their most challenging crisis. Now, it's a pleasure to have Mayowa here with us. So Mayowa, over to you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'd like to say first that Beatrice's uncle was actually like a very strong inspiration of mine. I read him a lot and, of course, pushed me in the direction I went. My journey with sickle cell basically has been, let me just say, from one accident to another. I happen to be one of those children who, yeah, my parents knew maybe a little late, not too late, but I'd already started my life before we realized what was wrong and all that. And what that did for me was that it was just like everything that was working in a certain direction just had to stop. And then we had to now start factoring all of that into my entire life. And I would say that my journey generally in life, becoming a journalist and all that, was also a function of sickle cell. So I had gotten into the University of Ibadan so first I wanted to study medicine. And then one day going through the whole process, this was maybe in my SS3. By the way, I went to a military school. So I was just going through the process and I thought about it to myself that, do I really want to spend 7-8 years in the university? And so when I had the chance, I spoke to my parents and told them that I actually don't think that the university is so much of a big deal. Let me just do a 4-year course and all that, blah, blah, blah. And so my parents gave me the free hand, asked me to let them know what I wanted to study. And after going through the JAM brochure at the time, I decided I was going to study food science and technology. In my mind, I thought it was just a breeze through 4-year course. But when I got into university, I found that first, it was a 5-year course. And second, it probably was not a lot of what I thought it was. But of course, I think that for many of us, what we cannot make up for in our physical strength, we try to make up for it in our mental strength. So try to do really good with the academics and all that. But sometime early into university, I had a crisis that was really serious. I landed at the University College Hospital, UCH Ibadan, and I was there for a month. So it was a time where I missed all of my continuous assessment tests, and I also missed a couple of exams. And so when I was eventually discharged, my parents had written the school to say that I was going to defer my admission to the next year. But somehow the whole process with the school was ridiculously slow, so much so that they did not acknowledge the letter until I had come back to school. Now, when I came back to school, I got a medical report from UCH and took it to all the places where I had missed a test, an assessment, an exam. And yes, I had problems with that. Almost all the lecturers said they could not do another assessment, they could not do another exam, and all that. So I just decided that whatever my exams could give me, at least the exams I did not miss, and whatever I could do without having to get help from these people since they were not willing to help, I was going to do myself. And at the end of that particular year, I basically struggled through. Most of my results were 40s, 50, 40, 40, 50, like that. But of course, I made it to the next level. But it was at that point, I would say for me, that was the point I decided that, okay, maybe I'm on the wrong path. Maybe this is an opportunity for me to write about things that people like me were facing within the school. And of course, when I was writing about these things, I did not particularly focus on sickle cell. I just basically focused on the general, how people get sick in school, and then they come back, and then the lecturer says, I'm not the cause of your problem, I'm not the reason why you're sick, and all that. And so I started writing and joined the press in school, started writing to some national newspapers. Of course, that was when I started reading Sinala Olumese in 2009, 10, 11. And so I started writing to different people at different times. And then I found out that, one, I enjoyed it more. Two, many of the things I complained about, once I wrote about them, someone was going to do something about it. And that was the point where I decided, okay, this journalism thing, I was actually going to take it more seriously. And maybe some of the unwise things I did was I stopped attending my classes because I was no longer interested in technology. I only show up for tests and exams, and my lecturers used to call me non-academic students. And basically that was how I scraped through the entire process. And at the end of it, of course, I barely graduated, but it was at that point of graduation that I decided, okay, everybody would probably interact with me and say, oh, this guy is smart, so why is his result so bad? You know, many of them could not match both. So it was when I decided that, okay, I was going to work more, pursue also some academic records, and see how I can put myself before the world as saying that no matter what I am facing, no matter what I'm going through, that I can actually succeed at anything it was I did. I went to the UK for my master's, and of course, the weather was first thing to hit me. But somehow I was able to understand my body, my system, what I had to do and what I had not to do. And it got to a point where I was able to balance everything. I had one crisis in the UK. And when I got to the hospital, I found that many of the doctors did not understand what was happening to me. So they just wanted to okay, so for example, they wanted to give me codeine. And before then, I had never taken codeine. So I was like, no, I don't take codeine. And they're like, oh, no, but this pain is so much and this and that. And I had to explain that, yes, I know the pain is so much, but over the years, I've also built a sort of threshold. And I also have the kind of drugs that I take. And so it was just like me taking care of myself by telling them what it is that I would normally take in a situation like this and all that. And basically, generally through life, I've come to understand that, one, the blame, and that's how I live my life. The blame is always on me. If I have a crisis, I'm the one who has done something wrong. I'm the one who has probably pushed myself a little too hard. So I basically do not outsource. I do not give any agency to anybody or anything else as being responsible for what I'm facing or what I'm going through. And I think with that, it has sort of made my life easier to manage, easier to maneuver, and of course to attain all the things I set out for myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayowa, because it's actually interesting to hear about your educational background, because usually when you hear Chevron scholars speak, you would usually think, oh, it's about the fact that they got impressive grades. But for you, it was a case that, okay, I'm not getting these grades, but I'm going to get it nonetheless. And you found a way to get through that, and the fact that you actually found that your pen was actually mighty, so it was instrumental to making real change. And it's quite interesting that you knew Beatrice's uncle that she just mentioned by accident. So it's quite interesting to hear that. So thank you to all our speakers for sharing their stories, or for sharing your stories, because I know that it is quite difficult to then reach out to a personal side of you to then share things that usually you would keep to yourself, and then it can make you vulnerable at some point. So I'm really glad that you're able to share your story, because it will definitely inspire people here. We have a number of questions. Buki has been addressing some of them in the chat box already. So Buki, thank you for handling that. So one question I would ask, I think is one that you've already answered, because we did get some questions before now, is what was the driving force behind your empire? Another question is, just get that. So another question is, how did you navigate imposter syndrome at work, right? I think we should possibly go for the next question, because the first question has kind of been answered. So how did you navigate imposter syndrome? Did you feel intimidated by your colleagues or pressure to over deliver, and then you find yourself falling short? Mayowa, do you want to go first with this?
Okay, so when I first came into the mainstream media, I had some pressure. I had to deal with some pressure. Now, pressure from the fact that I'm that guy in the newsroom who studied food technology. A lot of other people studied mass communication, media management, and all that stuff. So there was pressure to want to do so much. And then because I was also in school, so I took a postgraduate diploma in print journalism at the Nigerian Institute of Journalism, and it was a weekend course. So on Saturday and Sunday, I was always in school. So because I was also the guy who was only available from Monday to Friday, I had to compress 7 days work into 5 days. And I had to also show that, and of course, in doing that, sometimes it tells on your health. But I also had to show that I did not want preferences. I did not want the situation where you say that you have to give him a day off or 2 days off because he's sick or something like that. So I didn't want that. So there was a lot of pressure in balancing. In fact, it got to a point where when I got like my full-time offer, they said I had to work 7 days a week. And I told them I couldn't do it. And when I said I couldn't do it, I made it clear that it was not because of my health. It was because I'm in school. And of course, I put in a lot of work. In school, I graduated top of the class. And also at work, I also put in like some of the best work hours you could see. So yes, there was a lot of that. But at the end of the day, I feel like it was good for me because it helped me balance and come out on top on both sides.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mr. Bakare, do you want to answer the same question?
Yes, but I would say something. Beatrice, that herbal mixture you took, I took the same thing from the same hospital. It was horrid. It was one of those things and this is the first time I'm meeting someone else that actually used that herbal mixture. So anyway, so that's that. With regards to pressure, I've done a lot of, I would say, reckless things earlier on in my career, taking unnecessary risks in trying to make sure I deliver. And when you starting your own business and you're running your own business and you have people that are reliant on you, you push yourself to the limits. So this is the pressure that you put on yourself as a business owner. I remember once checking myself out of hospital and they said, no, you can't leave. You shouldn't. I said, well, you can't keep me against my will. So I left with the drip thing in my hand, went for the meeting, and I came back and I didn't hurt myself. You know, I mean, so things like that you do. But as time goes on, you then realize that, like someone said earlier on, you don't outsource the blame to an agency, it's you, right? And then you start to realize that, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't push that too much. And then it's just not physical pressure. There's also mental pressure, you know, and the more you start to do work, whether it's you're an artist, you're a business person or whatever, you start to understand the terrain better. The people you deal with start to understand you better. But there's one thing I always say, and I say it to everyone, you have to learn to be selfish. And also you have to learn to be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. If you can't do something, I can't do it. You know, sometimes you explain why, sometimes you really don't need to explain why, because at the end of the day, you know your limitations, you know what you should do, you know what you shouldn't do. For another thing again that Beatrice said, and which Maiwa also alluded to, is your medication, for example. You don't play with them. But also when you're in hospital, it's your responsibility to check everything that is given. And so I adopt that same thing at work. You know, if there's work to be done, we do it. If it's going to put me under unnecessary pressure, you know, not at the cost of my health, I won't. You know, so and that's it. So I think that comes to having coping mechanisms for yourself. You need to have coping mechanisms. These mechanisms will allow you navigate, you know, your way. And at the end of the day, I like what Maiwa said. You don't outsource the blame. It's on you. And no one knows that crisis pain like you do. Yeah. So if you're unable to do something, I can't do it. I have no point to prove to anyone. Yeah. You know, so that's just how to navigate that.
Thank you for that. So the next question is actually for Janika and Beatrice as well. For Beatrice, I would start by saying you worked in a number of agencies before you started your own outfit. How did they make you feel prepared for running your own outfits, particularly like starting a business and running it from scratch and having to deal with sickle cell? And then Janika, the same question.
Okay, I think just to speak a bit about what you were talking about, imposter syndrome. I think as a marketer, one of the things people should understand is words have power. I don't believe in the imposter syndrome. Everybody, you see, every day, people have to come up with new terms and new words to make you believe certain things or to prove their points. So people come up with the thing, you know, passion, and then everybody's chasing after passion. And then, you know, people start to talk about imposter syndrome, and then we all start sort of checking ourselves to see whether or not. There is no such thing as an imposter syndrome. You are who you are, and you're living within your own limits. Okay, so I actually believe that people should actually look. I probably joke with my health, and not in the way in terms of being reckless, right? You do that when you're younger. The older you get, I think you mature into understanding that your health is important. But in a workplace, actually have conversations with other people. I was in a high performance organization. There was somebody with ADDH. There were people who were on the spectrum of autism. There were people with kids at home who had autism. I had somebody who was dealing with other conditions. And I remember sometimes, I'll joke with my colleague. I'm like, I think we're going to the hotel this weekend. And she's like, I think I'll see you there. This was St. Nicholas we're talking about. It wasn't a hotel. But that's our mindset, that we need to take a break, right? Other people take a break and go to a hotel. I take a break and go to the hospital, and I just relax myself into those things, because I realized earlier on in life that, or rather later on in life, that when you're having a crisis, you're not in as much pain as you believe you are in, because you're actually panicking as much as you're in pain. So your panic comes from who's around to help me out. It comes from how quickly can I get to the hospital? You know, all of the different things. So when I talked about coping mechanisms earlier, right, I don't live too far away from my hospital. I don't live too far away from work. Who is my contact person, right? My friend who is closest. And that person knows if I call you at 3 a.m., like you see my number, you don't even have to pick up. Take your car keys, get into your car and get to me, right? And even when you don't have a person per se, like if I look, I live in Oniru right now. St. Nicholas is at Onikon. So literally that's 20, 25 minutes on a good day. On a day that's bad, I drive to 4 Points. There are cab guys at 4 Points. I park my car at 4 Points and the taxi takes me. But I know that it's like a 5 minutes drive to 4 Points and I can manage that in my ill health, right? So you have to actually create the life that supports you. But then when you go to, sorry, remind me what your other question was?
So
around starting my business. Okay, so yes, I'd say that a lot of I've worked as you sort of introduced, right? But I would say that one of my biggest, you know, for my education, I had the good fortune to work with Uche Majekodumi at Newton and David. That woman has dedication to her craft. You know, she invests heavily in her work, attention to. I was having a conversation a few weeks ago and somebody was talking about, you know, younger people being humble in their career. I say it's not about them being humble. It's actually about them understanding that everything is a discipline, right? You hear about the marketing discipline, the sales discipline, the leadership. These are all you have to discipline yourself in your craft, right? So the more time you spend and you focus on it, the same way they'll tell you for a pilot to sort of move a plane, he has to have done 10,000 hours, right? Practicing before he's given that thing. Whatever you put your time and energy to, you get better at. So yes, a lot of, you know, you know, I've had good fortune in working with a lot of organizations that have sort of prepared me for this journey. The truth is you are never as prepared as starting your own, right? When you're starting your own, you have more anxiety than working on someone else's business. If you look at the Nokia is over 100 years old, Microsoft, you know, all of these organizations have been around for time. But starting yours, when you started, the time period you started is all very different. I'd say that when I started Patrick Rowe Maison, for me was, you know, trying to figure out a path to my mental health and wellness, taking it more seriously. So I was consulting, I had a full-time career, and somehow you can almost get burnout in the midst of that. So what I decided to do was, okay, you know what? If I get a job that ensures that I can be home by 6:37, okay, take an hour or two, make myself a meal, relax. Before I get into maybe an hour or two of working on whatever it is I'm consulting on. Okay, so then I realized I like candles, you know, just the scents and the aromatherapy or whatever. But I could easily have started with diffusers. But I thought to myself, what is the value of a candle versus a diffuser? Yes, you get a fragrance in your home, but there's more intention. You light it, you put it on, you can sit back if you like to read, like, you know, Mr. Bakari, which I don't. You know, you light your candle, you relax in your chair. You can spend an hour or two reading while, you know, the aroma is actually helping you to heal, to improve, you know, your mental wellness. because different scents obviously do different things. That's why I use essential oils in my product and not fragrance oils, which have health implications. I try to make sure my products are very organic. And then of course my agate collection, which I hand paint myself, I find that in that time where I am creating those, I am at peace. Right? And I think that one of the things we need to understand in an hour of peace, an hour of calm, because there's so much going on in your life, all the time, that if you don't check in with yourself, right, you're going to have, a lot of issues. So I think that for me is actually the experience was great, but also, why are you in the business that you're in? It has to be serving something for you. Yes, of course, there's the alternate financial income and all of those, but it has to sort of, like Mayowa was saying, while he wasn't enjoying, food tech, he suddenly found something that was a balm to his soul, right? And again, I don't want everybody to think everything is about your health. In that situation where Mayowa was, education system was failing him. People weren't trying to actually understand what his strengths were. A lot of what we go through sometimes is not about sickle cell, right? If we make it that the only thing that's holding us back, it's not. There's so many lessons I learned in my career. I remember when I was going through, I had been in marketing, and obviously in marketing, you have a different set of KPIs, and the way you are rated is about the brand, it's about this. And then I moved into a sales role. And then my line manager then decides to start having different conversations with me. In marketing, it was about what you achieved, right? Nobody cares how you achieved it, but did you achieve what you set out to do? Now in sales, because relationship is important in sales, we now started having conversations of what you achieved and how you achieved it. So my first appraisal went, for the first time in my life, my first appraisal went bad. And my boss said, oh, you had to be on, what's it called? A path, literally a path to redemption. And I smiled. I said, okay, you won't catch me a second time. So by the next time when it was setting my KPIs, I was like, because you can't judge me for something you did not ask me to do. Right? And then suddenly when it's time for appraisal, so my KPI setting, I'm like, what, right? So going back to what Maya was saying, that everything is in your ball, it's in your court. I write everything out verbatim and I took it to him, I appraised it. So when he got to the appraisal, he couldn't now start saying, but you see, the truth is, I took the feedback of the how, because at the end of the day, it has helped with how I built relationships, right? Because at the end of the day, you're not living just for yourself, right? That is the one thing I think we all should understand about this crisis. There's somewhere in the Bible that says, when you're better, go and, encourage your brother, right? And I believe that that's what this forum is about, right? Is having the conversation to say, it will get better. There are certain things you have to put in place for it to get better. But the most important thing at the end of the day is that it will for sure, right? I take confidence in the fact that God has had 100% success rate in my life. So even when it's bad and I'm yelling at him, and to be honest, I yell at God a lot when I'm in pain. I'm like, dude, we can't be having this now. This is, so you use your faith to your advantage. It's so important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Janika.
Hi, Could
Okay.
you remind me of the?
Yes, I'll remind you, and then I also have another question that just came in for you. So the first question is, how did you prepare yourself to start your own business, especially having to deal with that alongside having sickle cell? And the second question is, how have you coped with having a hip replacement?
So in preparation to start my own business, I would say sometimes you don't realize that the journey that you're going through is preparing you for what is to come. Is something that I truly believe at the time, and I did experience, life in a job, so to speak, or in a career, and it just it didn't work for me. And I think a lot of those reasons, as Maya mentioned something which I now think is so important in life, taking accountability for your health and everything that you are going through is, you're not going to get very far if you can't take accountability, first of all. And a lot of, I think, my negative experiences in working was due to the fact that I was ashamed of having sickle cell. So I used to try and not be as open as I could about, my health. And in a recent keynote speak that I've done, actually, which I've entitled "Share Without Shame," despite the stigmas, despite people's opinions, despite what anybody may have to say, sharing and being open about what you are living with and how it affects you can actually make your life easier in terms of a career, in terms of business, whatever that is. So I had to learn that the hard way, you know, being at work one day and then the next day having to call and say, hey, I'm not well, I'm in hospital. And people thinking like, well, how can you be in hospital already? And you were just here like a couple of hours ago, and not understanding the impact of sickle cell and how suddenly a crisis can come on, and all of those things. So I knew that kind of having to, I think that like I said, my experiences taught me what I can do, what I can't do, what I like and what I dislike. And one of the things that I know that I can deliver on something that I am asked to do. What I am not always sure about is how that will happen. So if you give me a task and give me a deadline, I'll make sure that I meet the deadline or ahead of the deadline. But what you may not know is that I might sleep throughout the day and work throughout the night and still deliver on time. So it's about doing what works for you. And I think having flexibility was something that I realized that I needed, just because of the way that I sometimes feel unwell, or the way that I fall sick, or the way that my pains kind of tend to affect me. When I was before having surgery, my AVN used to gradually get worse throughout the day. The more I'd done throughout the day. So it was easier for me sometimes to do things in the evening. And so a lot of these things didn't even make sense. It was just how my body just kind of progressed, and learning to understand my body is something that helped me to navigate. So I think I took elements of different things that I learned over the years, and being in business or being my own boss was something that I aspired to be. However, didn't realize how demanding that would be as well, is something that I would say. Um, I done an internship I worked for free for near enough about 6 months before then getting hired into a role which was my events management role of organizing fashion shows around different countries around the world. So I traveled to Malaysia, Australia, Paris, loads of different places. And I was actually PA to the director. So I learned a lot of business skills very early on. I think that's something that I was privileged enough to do. So I could see what areas can be stressful, how you communicate with people, learn all of these things. And I think that taught me a lot. And you can also see in certain ways things that you would do and wouldn't do, or I wouldn't be able to do that because this, or I'd have to do that differently. So everything that we go through, I think, is just preparation. So when it came to myself kind of going into business and setting up a business, which the publishing house, I wouldn't have known kind of like 10 years ago that that was what I was going to do. However, here we are, and it's great, it's working. I also believe in having multiple streams of income, not just one. Maybe you have one umbrella, but having different things that can bring in incomes. One of the things that I definitely learned early on is the fact that when I don't work, I don't get paid. And having a health condition, which a lot of the time means that you may have to take time off, there's no, you know, sick pay, or there's no one that can cover my shift, or, you know, things like that. It has to be you. So being accountable for all of your actions, and like Maya always said, a lot of the complications, not so much the complications, but definitely crisis, early onset and things like that, are to do with myself. Burnout culture is suddenly becoming a trend, which is not trendy. And I think for those people that glorify, oh, you know, I need to take time off and read a book or go to a spa. Burnout for me, which I learned, is actually, like Beatrice said, checking into a hotel, which is not a hotel, it's the hospital. So it's not cool. Driving yourself to the brink of, you know, tiredness, fatigue, just for the sake of meeting the demands of a client, also not cool. And like I said, share without shame. So be open and honest. I have set days that I rest. I will not reply to messages. I will not respond to emails. I have my out of office on, and that is just a fact. There are set days where I know exactly what's going to happen, and nothing else will interfere with that. You have to be very strict with your structure and what you're doing and kind of how you do things. But once you get into the hang of it and get into a routine and get to understand your body and get to learn to take accountability and all of these things, it becomes second nature. It becomes something that's easy to navigate. Also, another thing that I would share as well is that it's important to have a team. A lot of the times, no matter how much, if you're a sole trader or if you're in business on your own, or, you know, you're the director, there are other people, secretaries, you know, I have like a distribution team, I have a marketing team. You can't do it all on your own. And that's also something that I had to learn the hard way when, you know, suddenly you're unwell and things still have to be done. And I think, you know, I've been in that position as well of being in hospital on my laptop or checking myself out of hospital because I need to go and do something. I've done a radio interview whilst being admitted into hospital. So there are certain ways that we'll push ourselves, but it's just about knowing limits and making sure that you have a good team around you of people that can support you in times of need, or that you can call on in times of need, and they know their role as well. So, you know, it's 50-50, it works well.
Thank you so much, Janika. That's really
helpful. The other thing was about my hip replacement. I would say that it was the best decision that I ever made in terms of having it done. It was, I say the best decision because it was something that my consultant didn't want me to do because of my age. So I got diagnosed with AVN at 17, and I knew what that was, and I knew how it was going to, you know, progress and, you know, get worse. And by the time I got to about 23, 24, I was actually taking painkillers like sweets. It was like part of my lunch. It was like breakfast, lunch, dinner, this. And it got to the point where I then started to have side effects from taking so many painkillers. And the only way that they wanted to treat me was for me to continue to do this. And I was losing my quality of life. I wasn't able to walk. I then was on crutches, and the pain was unbearable. Being on such strong medication throughout the day became unbearable. And then, you know, so for me, it was a decision that I had to negotiate my own health care, basically. And that's also something that I want to share, is that remembering, even though you have doctors, even though you have consultants, even though we have this hierarchy of people that it may be perceived that they are above us, this is you and your health, and you're the only person that can know you better than anybody else. So they may have the qualifications or the, you know, the knowledge of sickle cell as a whole, but you are the expert in you. So I had to kind of deliver this to them to say, hey, I know what I want my life to be like. I know what my quality of life could be like. It's easy for you to say we're not doing it because of your age, but at this point, it's not really worth living like this. So, you know, you have to kind of sometimes make these difficult decisions for yourself. So I pushed and pushed to have my surgery, and I had it at 24. Sorry, 25, because I had it a week after my birthday. And I instantly noticed the difference. Just waking up out of surgery, there was no more kind of AVN pain. There was surgery pain, but it was completely different. The avascular necrosis was causing me to have back pains, problems with my kind of posture, pains going down my legs. There was a lot of aches and pains. So the surgery was definitely a good decision for me, and still kind of, where are we now, 6 years later, it's still good. So I would, if the option is there, I would encourage someone to do it.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So the next question is for Buki and Mayowa. So the question is, did you have any role models in the sickle cell community? And if you didn't, like, what then inspires you and what helps you navigate murky waters?
Thanks. I can't say that I had a role model in the sickle cell community, to be honest. Growing up, I didn't really know a lot of people with sickle cell other than my brother. So it wasn't like I had a role model, but I did build a community of people living with sickle cell by Scaf and everything. I will say that the person that I always say inspires me the most, I'm going to try not to cry, is Nura. Nura was my friend from Scaf, who sadly passed away a few years ago. And I always say the story is that Nura gave me my voice, because when I joined Scaf, I didn't really used to talk about my personal experience, mostly because I felt a bit privileged. And a lot of the people that we were working with were either underprivileged from a sickle cell perspective, in the sense that they had really bad complications and they had really bad issues, and it was kind of exacerbated by the socioeconomic conditions. So I didn't really feel like the need to tell my story, but Noah always used to tell his story. Like, we would go out, like, he was a person that even taught me advocacy, I would say. And at that point, I don't even think he knew he was doing advocacy. He just used to go out and talk, you know. So we would go to schools, and Nura, the first thing he'd say is like, my name is Nura Abdullahi and I have sickle cell disease. That would be the first thing he would say. And he would, you know, talk about like his experience, and he would say he wasn't ashamed. He would go on radio stations, TV stations. That time in Abuja, we used to drive in Katie's father's car. You know, just going around, you like spreading the gospel. And I didn't know that time that he was preparing me for my voice, and I didn't know that I was learning from him. And I guess I just thank God that I had those years in Abuja with him before he passed away, because I think he birthed kind of like a legacy in me, and he birthed like that kind of like not being ashamed, not being, you know what I mean, not being scared, not like damning all the consequences. And that's kind of like what he used to do. Nura would be having a crisis, and we would go to do free genotype tests in the park, like literally. And then he actually learned how to draw blood and then I used to tell him, I'm like, no, I'm not a doctor, you shouldn't be draw blood. But he did for our free genotype testing, because there was a day we wanted to do free genotype testing at an event, and there was no doctor, no phlebotomist. And he's like, I can't do it. I've been observing it. And he did it. He drew the blood for like 60 people for a genotype test. So he was amazing. So I would say, in terms of like who became my role model and who like I learned a lot from, I would say it was definitely Nura. What was the second question?
Oh, I think you've answered it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much, Buki. Tijani, Mayowa.
Thank you very much. It's actually lovely, like hearing all this conversation and all these experiences. For me, I did not have anybody to sort of look up to. In fact, I did not know anyone. I was born in Oyo town. I had my first 3 years in Makurdi, Benue State. I had the next 3 in Para, and then Benin, Lagos, and all that. So the whole movement thing sort of did not allow me to settle down anywhere, to know anybody. So I basically did not have anybody to look up to, anybody who I knew who had it. Even, of course, my parents, both of them are AS, they don't. So it was me learning everything myself, me telling them how I felt. And for many of the people I spoke with at the time, they did not understand or know what I was going through. So when you say that you don't want to eat a certain food because you feel that when you eat that food, you feel this way, they have different reasons for why you are feeling that way, not exactly understand what you're going through. So I had that challenge. But I think that what sort of helped me was when I started attending clinics, going to the hospital, medical checkup, I started seeing people like me. I started seeing other persons. And 2 things it did to me was, number one, it showed me a lot of what I could become. And of course, as a young person, I know that maybe you still say I'm really small now, but then I was really small, like really small. So I used to be really afraid that maybe I'll never even like grow tall or be big or anything. So like I had those fears. And so when I go for those clinics, I see people who are tall, big, and all that. And I see people who are just there, like, and so it created a lot of fear in me. So I would say that it was sort of that fear that I could say was my driver, so to say, to tell myself that, okay, this is what I do not want to be. So I'll ask my doctor at every opportunity, what can I do not to be this? And sorry to add this. Okay, so there was a time I was admitted and I was representing the University of Ibadan at a public speaking event. It was a competition in Abuja, and I was admitted in Ibadan. And it was like the competition will start on Monday, and I was still at the hospital on Sunday. And I told the doctors that I had to go. And they said, no, you're not strong enough, and this and that. And I tried to explain that I know I'm not strong enough, but I feel like I need to do this. Like I would have time to be sick, more or less. That was how I felt. I would have time to be sick, but I will not have time to do this. So can you guys just let me go and I would come back to this? Because I had that fear that if I did not do it for the rest of my life, I would struggle. And as God would have it, they said if I could deliver a fantastic speech in the hospital, that they would let me go. And so I stood up, called for my bed, stood in the middle of the ward, gave a speech. And I did not even know, the nurses were listening. By the time I was done, the nurses were clapping. Then the doctor said they were joking, that they were not going to allow me go. And then the nurses started allude, no, you must let him go, and this and that. And I went, and fortunately, I won the competition. Now, when I came back to the hospital to be sick, now told them that, see, I still have time to be sick. What I don't have time for are all these things that I would miss if I stay sick. Of course, I was sick when I was delivering the speech. I had pains when I was giving some of those speeches, but I just knew that if I did not do it for the rest of my life, I would be feeling bad that I could have done it.
Thank you so much. I've totally enjoyed that, having time to be sick. But then it shows how you don't want to miss out on things in life and you don't want sickle cell to restrict you. So thank you for sharing that. The final question we've had coming is to Mr. Bakari. And the question is, what advice do you have for people with sickle cell seeking to build their empire?
All right, thank you. I've learned a lot today, actually. And you know how everyone exists in their own world and think certain things, like when I checked out of the hospital with the drip thing in my hand, I went for a meeting and went back. I thought I was the only person that's done that. I actually felt, proud of myself. And, yeah, I did that, push down whatever needs to be done. But then you hear someone else's speech, and then I've heard, so we are real warriors, right? Because that's a warrior spirit to even do that. So what advice do I have for anyone seeking to build an empire, anyone with sickle cell type empire? There's a common thread that has run through all the conversations we've all had here today. And because I've been taking notes, and I'll narrow everything into 4, but it's just not for people with sickle cell also. This advice is for people generally, because like Beatrice said, it's sickle cell or someone else has this or another person has that. Everyone has something that they're dealing with, right? And we all still have to work, building businesses, we're building careers, So the advice is, yes, for people with sickle cell, but people generally, right? Because if you have, the banks don't care if you have sickle cell or not, right? You still have to deal with them, building a business, right? So the advice is this: it's in 4 parts. The 4 areas broadly are: 1, coping mechanism; 2, know your limits, mentally, physically, just know your limits. 3, faith-based. You can be Christian, you can be Muslim, you can be Hindu. When you have strong faith, you believe strongly, right? That look, I'm not in this thing alone, and then maybe there's a superior power, whatever. That just even gives you an extra edge, right? And then number 4, attention to your medication, right? So it can be your own drugs, it can be attention to your medication, attention to the healthcare, that you're receiving, because at the end of the day, you are responsible for yourself. Like I was in hospital once, I had a crisis, not long ago actually, this was last year. And they were about to give me an injection. And I'm always very alert to anything that's been given to me. And I said, what's this injection you're about to give me? Do you know I have sickle cell? And the doctor had to stop and now read the charts again. And it's unfortunate I have to say this, but you find a lot of hospitals now, they are nice, they've got big fancy names, but the rate at which they're churning out doctors is alarming. So you find you go in today, this new set of young doctors, you're there again next time, another set of young, where's the previous guy who has gone to Canada? So and this is everywhere. And so you now find someone going through your charts, trying to, so you need to understand that reality is unfortunate, but that's, the world we live in now. So you need to know your history well. And if you have one doctor that has been attending to you for a very long time, fantastic. But if not, you need to be very alert and vigilant with the drugs you're giving and the drugs you're taking. So yeah, so that's it. Coping mechanism, like I said, not be ashamed to be selfish. It's your health. You're responsible for yourself. Any decision you take will affect you at the end of the day. So, you need to know how to plot, on with that. And second one, know your limits mentally, physically. I used to pride myself on being able to pull all-nighters back in the days. If I have something, I'll pull an all-night. I did it twice, fallen ill, don't do it again. Once it's a certain time, we'll carry on tomorrow. If we can, then that's it. Know how to delegate, like Leah said, that's also very important. Have a strong team around you. It's part of, the coping, mechanism. Have your, have your me time, get some of Beatrice's lovely candles, put them up, watch a movie, read a book, take your own time out. My phone is on silent constantly. Everybody knows that. It doesn't ring out. My phone is just on silent permanently. When I pick up my phone is when I'm ready to deal with things, right? When my phone is there, then I'm not ready to deal with anything. Everybody has their own little coping mechanisms here and there. Whatever works for you, it's you. Faith, whatever it is, you have, just believe. If you're not over 21, yeah, I think everyone's over 21. Beatrice said, well, maybe this is bonus time. Hey, I don't know. I think I'm going to live to 100. but whatever, we'll just keep pushing along, right? And we enjoy every day as it comes along. So my daughter Inko is on this, she's listening, she's on this. And like I said to her when she was asking me about picking university and wanting to study business, I said, study what you really, really will enjoy for your first degree. It doesn't really have to be business, just study whatever you'd enjoy. You know, if you want to do business after your first, you can go and do an MBA, right? But study what you'd enjoy, because university is not just about academics, it's also about living life and experiences, you know, so, and that's life, right? So study what you enjoy, try and do what you enjoy, you know, and you push through. And then know your medical history. So those are the 4 points, you know, and just be strong. I have, you know, that's it really.
Thank you, Mr. Bakari. You effectively closed the session for us. I'll just call on Buki. First, I would like to say thank you to everyone who came on here to participate, also to our audience for spending this time with us. We've had about 60 people here with us today, and given like the time, given it's Friday and all of that, I think that's a good, quite a good turnout, and the fact that a lot of people are working from their offices. But I'll hand over to Buki as the lead of outreach and partnership in Scaf to give the closing remarks. And once again, thank you, everyone.
Hi, if you don't mind, before Buki comes on, I just want to say something to everyone. I think we're at an auspicious time post-COVID, where there's a lot of conversations around inclusion and diversity. And I want to encourage everybody to try to ensure that within whatever space they're playing in, that they're actually engaging in how workplaces are being shaped for the future. Secondly is, I think as we move forward, we see a lot of opportunity in jobs that don't require you to chase after other people. You know, I remember somebody talking about games earlier, wanting to play tennis. And my father had said, look, as long as you're not playing somebody or to someone else's speed and you're playing at your own pace, you're probably going to do better in life. So there are a lot of sort of digital related trainings available today. So everything from being a digital marketer to being a business analyst to being a data scientist, things that you can do from the comfort of your home. I would really encourage a lot of people, even being voiceover artists, right? I'd really encourage a lot of people to go and start looking for some of these opportunities where they can sit in the comfort of their home and actually work and earn. And I will tell you, earn a lot more than you do running after some of the other sort of, you know, daily hustles, as we call it in Nigeria. Because in the next sort of 10, 20 years, I think that, you know, as a community, things will get better. We're seeing a lot of, you know, I guess, advances in sort of the medical and biotech space. So I know that things will get better, but you have to get your mindset right. Your mindset is so important to you actually achieving anything. You know, we all have our different stories. We all have our different experiences. You know, just listening to Mayowa talk about his experience in the UK. I remember the first time I got sick in the UK, and you know, they said I should use typically they give you oxygen. And for some reason, this oxygen was a bit weird. And I'm like, what the hell? They're like, oh, there's codeine in the thing. And I refused to take it. Got to the hospital. I sat in the wheelchair waiting almost 45 minutes to be attended to. The next time the ambulance came, I took the oxygen because I figured I would rather be healing if I have to wait 45 minutes to get attendance. But that's not to say that in the UK, Medicare is not good. I found out eventually that there is actually a special section in the NHS that looks after sicklers. And the care they have, literally I was getting you know, emails and letters, come and do this test, come and do this, whatever. Every 6 months we were checked and whatever. So everywhere you go, irrespective of what country you're working in, try to understand, you know, the healthcare system and find where you are going to be best fit. And please allow yourself to explore some of these places. High altitude places, avoid, please, but just check wherever you are. So Lagos, I think, is about 40 in terms of altitude. Look for places that you can acclimatize to easily and sort of prepare yourself to it. But please set goals. For me, my goal was just, I didn't want to be poor. You know, I didn't want to be poor. I didn't want my family members to have to beg anybody for anything. If you watch my video, you'll understand. And that goal drove me more than the issue of I wanted to be healthy, right? That was more important to me. So for me, I navigated my health to serve that goal, right? So when I would get sick, I could be sick for 2 weeks. I could be sick for, you know, sort of 4 weeks at a stretch. But I always ensured that if Beatrice is working on something, she over-delivers. So you always want her on the project, right? So know what you know for sure. You know, find the right skills to sort of deal with your health. And then just prepare yourself for the next 10, 20 years because you will be alive, right? So this is me pushing all of you. You will be alive, okay? Just hold on to, you know, to your faith and everything will be all right in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. Thank you, Mr. Bakare. Thank you, Jenica. Thank you, Maiwa. And of course, thank you, Nkechi, for organizing this and moderating. I think it's been a really great session, even for me that I'm surrounded by sickle cell and you know, I live and breathe it. I've learned so much today from listening to you all. I think I just wanted to say that my own kind of concussion that my parents used to get was something called Swedish bitters. Don't know if you guys know it, but somebody convinced my dad that it was going to change my life, and then he would make me take it. Then he now said, oh, in order not to discriminate, he now started making my siblings who didn't have sickle cell also take it. So they would all just look at me like, because of you are taking this Swedish bitter. So that stuff was completely nasty. It's etched in my memory for the rest of my life. And then to Mr. Femi's point and Mayawa's point, I've also checked myself out of the hospital, but mine was for a different reason because I was in the US and had been in the UK as a student. I didn't know that you had to pay if you're not living in the US. And so that was a whole different drama. But it's just very important to have these conversations so that we can share our experiences because like Mr. Femi had said, oftentimes when you're going through stuff, you think you're the only person going through it, or you think that your experience is unique, or you think that no one else can possibly be feeling this type of pain. No one else can, you know, have gone through this kind of thing. Like someone in the chat was talking about having AVN at 30 and feeling like she's too young. But then Jen is telling you that she had AVN at 17 or 18, and you know, that's even, you know, much younger. So whatever it is that you think you're going through, you're not alone. And I think what I really like us to leave this conversation with is to actually have conversations. Let's engage with each other. If I hadn't seen Beatrice's story, I would have never known that, you know, someone with sickle cell can climb to the top of such a male-dominated career. And there's so many things that you can't imagine or you don't think it's possible for yourself. But if you don't ask, if you don't reach out, and if you don't kind of build a community of people who are similar to you, who have sickle cell, who kind of understand some of these challenges, then sometimes you might be inadvertently placing a cap or a limit on yourself. And I hope that that's the role that Scaf continues to play in kind of opening up these conversations and creating safe spaces for people who have sickle cell or who have whatever kind of challenges that they feel is hindering them to be able to open up. So thank you. And tomorrow is World Sickle Cell Day. So I encourage you all to please share on all your social media and to share with everybody that you know to raise awareness about the importance of people knowing their genotype and people continuing to support those that live with sickle cell in any way that they can. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining.